Welcome to the Future of What? I'm your host, Portia Sabin, president of the independent record label Kill Rock Stars. In 1986, John Strohm, Freda Love, and Juliana Hatfield started the band Blake Babies. They put out a few records, toured a bunch, and broke up by 1991. But in many ways, their band captured the spirit of indie music of the late 80s and early 90s and defined what it meant to be an independent band. Although a product of their time, there are aspects of the Blake Babies story that feel timeless and universal. We talked to all three members about that time and how they've recently gotten back together to play some shows. It's all coming up on The Future of What?
Can I have a taste of your ice cream? Can I lick the crumbs from your table? Can I interfere in your crisis? No, mind your own business. No, mind your own business.
John Strohm is a musician and a lawyer. John, welcome back to The Future of What?
Thank you. It's so great to be back.
It's like you never missed us. Wait.
That's right.
So today on The Future of What, we're going to talk about you because you have an interesting life. And, you know, I think one of the things that's interesting to the people who listen to the show is, okay, I'm a musician. I'm doing the whole musician thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what does my life look like and where am I going with this? And, you know, you were a musician in the 80s and 90s,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're a lawyer. So,
Well, I'm still a musician.
well, I mean, in terms of where the money comes from.
Right. Well, actually, I made a few bucks a couple weeks ago playing music, and it felt great.
Get
and
out.
I was trying to convince my bandmates to not pay me because I knew that if I brought it home, it would immediately go to paying, you know, for somebody's soccer outfit or whatever, you know, to get the porch power washed. It's, you know, I play for fun now, and thank goodness it's not my source of income. But yeah, I had a decent run there in the fabled 80s and 90s,
Yeah.
playing music, and I was never quite at the point where I was like, hey, I'm a professional musician. You know, it was always, you know, I'd get paid a little bit of money sometimes, and then I'd run out of money and go get a job or whatever. But I definitely did it full time.
Well, your first band, the first band that I knew you from was Blake Babies.
Mhm.
And that band started in, what, in 86?
Yeah, that's right. So I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, and I was a music kid. You know, I was in a hardcore band that was touring around regionally when I was in, you know, 10th grade, and I was, you know, my friends and I started an all ages club. I was one of those kids, and by the time I moved to Boston to go to Berklee College of Music, which I felt was the best choice for somebody that didn't really want to go to college and really just wanted to get a band going, I was immediately dug in on, you know, trying to replicate whatever it is I was doing on a grander scale. And that was 85. I moved out there. And that was also around the time that I got pretty burned out on the hardcore scene. And I was disappointed by the hardcore scene in Boston, which was very sort of dogmatic and a lot of rules, you know, whereas if you grew up in Southern Indiana, if there were rules to punk rock, we didn't know them. You know, you just kind of dress up and get a band going. And so I made some friends when I first moved to town. One of them was Juliana Hatfield, who was my collaborator in the Blake Babies, and then the guys in the Lemonheads were also early friends I made, and they became my crowd, my group of friends. And my girlfriend from high school moved out to join me second semester. I was at Berklee in early '86, and you know, she and Juliana and I were Blake Babies. So we started out as just 86 was really just kind of practicing in the Berklee dorms and getting out and playing a few parties, and you know, didn't really launch as a real going concern until a year or two later. But we had a nice run. We made a few albums for a label called Mammoth Records. It was based in North Carolina, and we got to tour the country. We eventually got over to Europe, and I was simultaneously playing drums in the Lemonheads when it was a bit more underground. And then when Blake Babies broke up and Juliana, you know, I guess went solo, as it were, then I joined Lemonheads full time as a guitar player and did that for a number of years. And also made records on my own. I had a couple bands, and Tenna was one of them.
Yes. Well, we'll get to that.
Okay. That was like a inappropriately long summary of my music career.
Well, I want to go back to, you said you were a hardcore kid, and that's hilarious because then Blake Babies could not have been farther from like a hardcore band in my mind.
I think it was really it was a very conscious reaction against that, and I was a drummer in hardcore bands, and I loved it. I loved everything about it, but I had about 2 years of listening to almost only hardcore music, and by the end of high school, I was kind of done. And Freda was never really into hardcore. She was always into, Velvet Underground and John Prine and Dylan and all the stuff that we all love for all time. And so she was always kind of pushing in more in the direction of songs, and I got into songwriting, and then Juliana's voice was never really suited for anything much more aggressive than what we did. It's sort of a bit of a delicate instrument, and we figured out how to kind of rock behind her a bit more over the course of the band. But early on, it was just arranging the songs in the way that made sense. And the first people outside of Boston to really embrace what we were doing back when it was very underground was Calvin Johnson from K Records.
Yeah.
And we went on and did some dates with a couple of his bands, and they really kind of identified with what we were doing. And then when we started making records at Fort Apache, they lost interest, I think, because it was too commercial sounding.
Yeah.
That kind of gives you a little bit of context for what we were doing very early on and who was responding to it. It was, underground pop is what we would call it at the time. And people didn't think of pop music the same way then as they do now. If you say we're a pop band now, they assume you mean top 40 type act. And back then there was, as you'll recall, I'm sure, there was more of, a self-identifying pop underground where it was about the structure of the songs and the arrangement of the songs and the content of the songs more than the commercial ambition, I guess.
Exactly. And that meant something very different. I remember seeing Blake Babies, and I don't remember where it was because don't get me started about, 30 years ago or whatever this is we're talking about. But one of the things I really appreciated was that probably Blake Babies was the first band I ever saw live with a female drummer.
Wow.
And that was a big deal for me because I didn't pick up the drums myself till I was 21 years old, partially because I grew up in an apartment in Manhattan, which, where you can't play drums in an apartment in Manhattan. And second of all, because I still was sort of, raised in American culture and, girls don't make loud noises like that, and it was such a freeing and amazing experience to see that. I was like, oh, wait a second. This is an option.
That's great. And Freda's a wonderful drummer, and she sort of fell into it almost seemingly by accident. This is going back to high school, but I was learning guitar, and just one afternoon she said maybe I could play drums, and she got behind my drum kit, and usually when somebody says, hey, let me have a go at that, and you try to teach them drums, and I'm sure you know this as well as anyone, it's futile because it's hard. And people get frustrated after 10 or 15 minutes. But she was very quick to pick it up, and she very immediately had this distinctive and very steady feel. And that's really now that we're back playing Blake Baby shows this past summer, and we're doing it, we're doing some this fall as well. It's like that's what's notable is she as a drummer has a very, very singular feel, and there's nothing macho or powerful about it. She's hits the drums without a tremendous amount of force, but it always has a wonderful groove about it, and it's very, very consistent and dependable, and it's a lot to do with the sound of the band. And when we had to go out and tour with a different drummer one time when we went overseas, it just felt completely different and kind of wrong. So she was a huge part of what was good about that band.
Yeah. And that's that is another good lesson too, is you don't have to hit the drums, you don't have to have a double kick. It doesn't have to be the most macho thing in the world to be amazing, truly amazing. And now, of course, thank God, we've got tons of fabulous female drummers to point to. I mean, they're everywhere now. But I feel like at the time it was I was 15 when you guys started, and that was a big deal for me, to see that.
That's great to hear. Well, there's nothing back in those days when if you started a band like that, it was not for commercial ambition. It was not for monetary gain. It was for something else. And, it was certainly for artistic expression, but I think also, and for fun, but I think also it was about wanting to inspire people, wanting to spread this thing of, let's get let's get a band together. It doesn't matter if you're a virtuoso or not, as long as you've got some ideas and some cool songs. And if there was any one thing that we would all want to have come out of it, it would have been, younger people hearing it and saying, I want to do that.
That was Nothing Ever Happens by Blake Babies. If you're enjoying this program, please subscribe to our show on iTunes. To find out what's coming up next, follow us on Twitter at KRSFOW. You're listening to The Future of What? We're talking with John Strohm. Just looking at your bio and looking at who you know, I mean, the number of people that you know that I know at this point is probably insane. But just looking at, the fact that you were in Lemonheads. Well, Lemonheads came and played at my school when I was in college, and I'm positive that you were in it, in the band at the time.
They left a wake of destruction behind,
yes,
sure.
You left a wake of destruction. But it was like but those were the days when not only, was it a community on the outside, but it was a community on the inside too. So we had that show, that Lemonheads show, in a dorm lounge, right? It was not.
What was the school?
Grinnell College in Grinnell,
Grinnell's
Iowa.
where my brother went, by the way.
Oh, crazy. But, that's what I mean. It's like indie rock was a thing that felt accessible. It felt like people could do it. It felt like it could be part of our lives. It wasn't that separation that we find, there was separation and glamour and, the pop stars throughout the history of pop. But I feel like there was that moment in the 80s where we all felt like, hey, I can do this. I know people who do this. This is a thing.
Well, I try to get into my own head about what would have motivated me back then, because there was no question about what I wanted to do, and my life was an absolutely straight line until the late 90s, when it started to get more difficult to do it, and I started to get more frustrating. But there was no question about what I wanted to do, and it was not about trying to be a rock star, trying to get rich, but I still wanted to do it, desperately, and I think it was wanted to be part of that world, and just the transcendent fun of doing it. And it definitely came out of the passion for it, definitely came out of the punk scene and the feeling of that and the community of that. So I think that all the way up until the transformative moment around 91, when, the year punk broke, it was very much about, underground culture. And I didn't get the sense that people were really too ambitious to look too far past that, and then very quickly after that, it became more about commerce, and things got very confusing.
Definitely. And I always point to REM at that time, because when I was listening to REM in college, that was a band that was pretty popular. Like a lot of people knew that band, and they'd done records on IRS or whatever, they were on an indie, they were a good solid band, but nobody was chasing the brass ring. You know what I mean? It didn't seem like that was the thing. And then by the time I graduated in 93, my band from college, we moved to Minneapolis because we were going to make it in the big city.
That's great.
And that just tells you where we were at in those days, because we thought, oh yeah, we'll move to Minneapolis because of course in 93, the industry was there. That's what, I just remember, that's people just thought you were going to go, play the Uptown and, an A&R guy was going to sign you. And that was happening.
It was happening. Yeah, I mean, that was actually
Yeah.
very realistic.
Yeah.
For a minute, actually, 93 Minneapolis, that was around the time I used to play sometimes and record often with a band called Polera. Do you remember that band?
Oh my God, I was totally friends with Jennifer, of course.
Jennifer, yeah. Well, Ed Eckerson was and is to this day one of my best friends, and he and I worked on a lot of records together. But I worked on that first Polera record, which was 93,
Yeah.
up in Minneapolis at the
Yeah.
Terrarium studio. And my role was to play one thing in every song. So I would sit on the couch all day and, I'm not going to say exactly what I was doing on the couch, but I was sitting on the couch and wait till I got inspired for that, one sound I was going to put down, which might be a tape loop I worked on for 5 hours. And it was actually an incredibly creative scene. And that was one of the bands, actually, that's a good lens into the business, because they made that record and it was very humble at the time. It came out on Twin Tone Records, which is basically a local label that had some big national releases, international, but it basically functioned as a community label. And they got some good reviews, and some A&R people got interested in it. And then the next thing there was a bidding war, and it was about deal terms, and people flying the band to New York or LA to take them out for $1,000 sushi meals or whatever, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And I was a fly on the wall for the whole thing, and it was absolutely fascinating. And of course, since listeners are likely not to have heard of Polera.
Right. But that's a good example.
They didn't get to be rock stars because they signed a huge record deal, and then it was Interscope Records, and they signed with Tom Whalley. He left the label. They completely changed the direction of the label, and they kind of got lost in it. And it ended up being really good for Ed because he got a bunch of money and he built a studio, which is still his livelihood to this day.
Right.
But it was a very strange sort of disorienting time when it was like, hey, we can sit in this basement and make this record and put it out there into the world, and then, a month later, there's a limo pulling up in front of your house.
Yeah.
It was bizarre, especially coming up through the underground and seeing that, and my bands were already established on labels at that point. Blake Babies didn't exist. Lemon Heads were signed to Atlantic, so that was really kind of an early '90s phenomenon. But I will say that in terms of what led me to want to be in the business, it was partly just what I perceived as being the insanity of that entire thing.
Right.
That process, and that, and seeing all these bands get artists get signed to deals with major labels, and then, feel like they were, kind of approaching the summit. They'd done it. They were going to be, have a career. They were going to be huge, and then have nothing happen, and all the heartbreak associated with that. I was like, this is a really dumb system.
So that's what led you to decide to get into the business side of it.
That was part of it, and I wasn't hostile to labels at the time. I'd come up through indie, so it was fascinating to me. And Blake Babies had been the subject of a lot of sort of courting from major labels.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd seen it from that side, and just the whole thing was fascinating to me. And but it was also, I found the whole thing totally depressing. And I knew some people who were in very successful acts during the '90s, and I could feel from them the pressure they were under to deliver commercial music. I didn't like where alternative rock ended up in the mid to late '90s, basically becoming a radio format. And when I went to law school, at the end of the '90s, my hope was that I would find a way to be in the business and to work with artists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was what got me to that point. Also, just having a complete mental breakdown where I thought that going to law school was a good idea.
Do you regret that?
I don't regret it at all, actually. But this is the thing. You'll probably relate with this, either personally or through people that you know. But when I made the decision to go back to school and give up music, it was really depressing. Even though it made sense, even though I knew it was a wise decision. It was a very depressing decision because the unique sort of insanity that musicians get into who are in record deals, who have working bands, is that you're kind of living album cycle to album cycle, and you're just looking ahead to the next project you're going to do, and you have absolute belief that that's the one that's going to carry you to your goals. You have goals in mind, and it's like, my goal is I want to own a home. My goal is I want to make enough money to support a family or whatever. I mean, not unreasonable goals, but goals that were beyond reach at that point.
Right.
And then you go through the album cycle, and you'd come out the other end basically in the same place, and you'd say that's okay because we're going to do it again.
Right.
And we're going to get there. This sort of unflinching belief that you're going to get there. And so that's why it's so depressing to get off that track, because it's sort of an admission of you didn't get there. Now, I have a very different perspective on that now, which is, I absolutely got there because I had an incredible run of nearly a decade of playing music full time, and I got to travel the world, and I got to make a bunch of albums. I got to play with incredible musicians. I got to feel what it's like to stand on stage and play to 10,000 people that know your songs. I got to do rare things that most musicians never get to do, and now I look at that as an incredible blessing. But at the time, at the end of that, it was just like I failed. I didn't get there. And it's such a tiny percentage of musicians that get to, spend their life making their living with their own completely uncompromised creative music. I mean, hardly anybody gets to do that, right?
It's true.
And I see that now more than ever.
It's true, but I also think,
Yes.
I feel like there was this golden age, and maybe this is just age speaking, but I feel like there was this golden age, prior to the internet when, if you were in a band like Blake Babies or Antenna or Lemonheads prior to them getting signed, to a major, you could make a living. You could be a working musician. You could do the album cycle lifestyle, and you could be okay. Like, it was something that you could actually survive on because the amount of albums you were going to sell was going to, bring some cash in. You didn't have no chance of selling, 1,000 records, which nowadays is like 1,000 records were like, woohoo, which is tragic. But that's the economy today. And then, 91 happened, and I feel like everybody's expectations got really skewed because it was like, we are going to be the next big thing, or, why aren't we like this band? Everybody was comparing themselves to these other bands that they knew. And, well, this happened for them. Why can't it happen for us? And I just feel like it created this sort of atmosphere of unrealistic expectation that I think you alluded earlier to not really existing in the early days of when you started out.
Well, you certainly weren't, starting some scrappy band and getting a gig at TT the Bears and thinking like this is the path to arenas at the time. Just would have seemed ridiculous, and it would have been laughable at the time. Well, I don't know. I don't.
Now I think people do think that.
Right, and I started to see that in the mid '90s. People getting into playing in what I would have previously thought of as underground type bands who were very careerist about it, saying like, we want to get signed to a label, and without a real nuanced understanding of even what that meant.
Right.
And another one of the reasons why I felt like I should get into the business side is because very naturally and very organically, especially when I was living in Birmingham in the late '90s, I followed my then girlfriend, now wife there. I lived there for over a decade, and people were coming to me for advice about the industry, about decisions they should make, and and the advice I was giving them was thoughtful and was often helpful, and my thought at the time was, I should really find a way to get paid for this,
Yeah.
or find a way to do it in a way that I could actually provide better resources and better opportunities. But I had a lot of that, people coming in to want to talk about what they're trying to do with music and being very careerist about their goals. And, like their goals are really about getting signed or getting famous. And that's one of the things I see now, because now that I'm practicing law and I represent almost exclusively creative musicians, one of the first questions I always ask musicians when we have a meeting is what their goals are. And I hear two basic answers to that question. One of them is, my goal is to make my music on my own terms and to make a living. And that's the goal of the creative musician. That's like the basic template goal, and express it slightly different ways, but that's what it comes down to. And then the other goal is, I want to be the biggest artist in the world.
Right.
And that's the goal of the commercial musician.
Right.
It isn't about about sustainability is it isn't about about their art or their expression. It's about wanting to be huge. And I don't tell you that because I want to disparage either one, because I'm always grateful when someone's honest about it. I mean, it's a drag when somebody says I want to do my work on my own terms. I want to make a living, and then you later find out that they want to be the biggest artist in the world, and you've given them advice that's probably inappropriate for that. But it's really interesting to start to see that the way people frame their goals.
Absolutely. And I was while you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, wow, I wish that the musicians that I talked with these days could be so clear about what their goals are, because what happens with me way more often than that is, you get people who think they want to be a career musician and express themselves and make a living. But really what they want to be is a hobby band that only plays once a month in their hometown and never has to leave their girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
That's way more common,
Right.
but people are really unwilling to admit that, that's actually really hard to get people to say, because of course, you say, what do you want? And they're like, I want to be a rock star, and what the hell does that mean?
And you find that you can't do much to help them if they're not putting more into themselves, of course.
Well, right. We can't put anything more into them than they're willing to put into themselves. It never works, that's just never works.
Well, that's also when managers show up, when things start to work. And that is one of the frustrating things about the way the industry works now, because all of us try to avoid the projects where it's just about shopping deals, because that's a very frustrating thing to take on if there isn't much going on. Trying to convince people like you to, spend 5 minutes and listen to something. I don't expect that the people who are the gatekeepers in the industry are going to listen to something just because I say it's good. There has to be more there. And so once an act gets to the point where there is some traction and some things going on, and some, if you're presenting it to a major label, some data to analyze or whatever, then it can make a lot of sense. But usually it's more like a if you build it they will come kind of situation. And usually the managers start to show up and express interest when there is something going on. So it's extremely frustrating for artists who are saying, how do I get a manager? And the answer is just keep building it, and they'll show up, and they will.
Yep.
But that's not the most, kind of comforting thing to express to an artist.
No.
Hey, just keep doing your thing and building it, and they'll show up when the time's right. But it's true.
Yeah.
That is how it works. And it is true that if a big guns manager is willing to step in and help a true baby act, they can probably find some shortcuts. But they have to have a real incentive, because good managers are definitely, in it because they're passionate, but they're also definitely in it because they want to make money.
Right. And that's a perfect point to end on, because, this is a podcast about the music business, and it is a business, and people need to understand that. So, as much as it's about love and creativity and art and all that stuff, it's also, at the end of the day, if you're going to do it full time, it's about money. You got to be able to make money.
One of the things I'm incredibly grateful for being a musician is that I've reached a point or built something where I get to be involved with artists whose music I love and whose work I really respect. And that makes it a lot easier for me to dig in and do my job when I really feel like, the music I'm working for is important. And obviously, having spent over 30 years in music, I feel like music is incredibly important. It's in terms of my own priorities, it's very high. I have my family and the people in my life take precedence over everything, but music is incredibly important to me. And, the discovery and development side of it is incredibly exciting.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, John Strohm is a musician and a lawyer. You can catch him on the road with Blake Babies this year. So thanks so much for coming back.
Thank you so much, Portia. I'm glad to know you're from Grinnell. That's great.
I never did you wrong, but it makes a better
was On by Blake Babies. You're listening to The Future of What. If you're enjoying this program, like us on Facebook and become a subscriber on iTunes. We're talking to Juliana Hatfield and Freda Love. Juliana and Freda, welcome to The Future of What.
Hi.
Hi, thanks.
Hi. Yay. Okay, so I already talked to John separately, and I was actually interviewing him to talk about life as a music lawyer. But we ended up talking so much about Blake Babies that we just decided to just do the whole episode about Blake Babies.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Cool.
Because I have a theory. You guys were formed in 1986, and I was 15 years old in 1986. And I really feel like Blake Babies was one of those bands of that era that really kind of defined a moment in indie rock that has gone and won't come back, but was very powerful at the time. You know, I mean, Freda, you were such an inspiration to me. I never knew that a woman could play drums. I didn't know that that was a thing that one could do.
Yeah, there aren't a ton of us out there.
Yeah. And then I went on and became a drummer and did that whole thing,
Oh,
which was
that's awesome.
great. But, it's incredible to have role models. So instead of just totally fangirling out, I will start this legitimately and say, would you please tell us the story of how you guys got together?
Yeah, I'll let Juliana start, and I could chime in as needed.
Well, I was attending the Berklee College of Music, and John Strohm was also attending Berklee. We didn't know each other when we started school, but I had transferred from Boston University after one semester there because all I wanted to do was play in a band, and I was very socially kind of awkward, really shy, didn't know how to meet people or get a band together, and I just had no luck at BU. So I figured I'll go to music school and I'll get a band together there. I didn't know how I was going to do it because I was just painfully shy, and I didn't talk to anyone. So to make a long story short, a story that's already too long, I was in my dorm room one night just thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get a band together? I want to die if I can't be in a band. And then there was a knock at my dorm room door, and John and Freda were standing there, and I opened the door and I said, hey, I'm John, this is Freda, do you want to be in a band? That's how it happened.
Wow.
That's totally how it happened.
I mean, that's a really short version. Freda, do you want to say any more about that?
I'll say a couple of things about it, just that I was hanging out at Berklee. I wasn't a student there, but John was my boyfriend at the time, and so I was around, and we noticed Juliana because she really stood out in the otherwise very kind of heavy metal surroundings of Berklee. She's really cool, punk-looking young woman with the leather jacket on, and she looked super cool, and we just wanted to know her, and we wanted to start a band with her, knowing literally nothing about her. But a friend of John's who lived in the dorm on the same floor had also noticed Juliana. She's quite beautiful, as she is, and called her Crying Dream Girl, because she's really beautiful, but she looked really sad and lonely. So before I knew who she was, before I knew her name and what our future entailed, she was Crying Dream Girl to us.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's incredible. That's a great story, partially because I think there's a lot in it. This radio show that I do is aimed a lot at young people today who are trying to make it as musicians or songwriters or whatever, to get into the industry. And I think that whole thing of just wanting something, I know that I want to do this and I don't know how. That's a huge amount of the battle. Just having that goal and having that dream is kind of a big deal. You have to have that.
It is. I think you do when you're first starting out. You have to have a kind of delusional belief in your dreams and your goals. I mean, it may seem delusional, but you kind of have to believe in it that hard in order to have the guts to actually go forward to do. When I transferred from BU, it was a safe choice for me after high school. It was just sort of an all-around good liberal arts college, but once I was there, my desire or my need to play music and make original music was so strong that I had no choice but I gravitated toward Berklee. Fortunately, I was admitted into Berklee, and I had no idea how I was going to make it happen because, I don't know how people started bands. And I went there just kind of blindly thinking and hoping that I would get a band together. Somehow the band would happen. And Berklee just seemed like a better environment to make that happen than Boston University did. So, yeah.
So when you guys got to that point where you actually met each other and started playing as a band, how much had you played before? Like, Freda, had you been playing drums for a while?
I'd been playing drums for about a year, not for very long, but I did learn how to play a basic drum beat when I was still living in my hometown of Bloomington, Indiana, and kind of delusionally felt like that was enough. Like I knew everything I needed to know and like ready to start a band. So I was really buoyed by that optimism and that desire to be in a band, whether I was ready to do it or not. I had that like intense wanting to be making music, and that kind of carried me through. But I had a lot to learn still at that point. I was a bare beginner.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel you because when I finally found out that, women could play drums, I went and took drum lessons at my college. And after one drum lesson, I said, if I don't play in a band, I will never do this because this is boring. I'm not going to sit in this room and just go thump, thump, thump. So the next day I got in the band.
That's great.
So I started playing in a band, playing drums after having one drum lesson.
Yeah, so it's comparable in some ways, but it's actually it's not a bad way to learn. Like learning in front of people, like doing it badly, it can inspire you to get better pretty fast.
Totally. And also just having people who are accepting, who are like, okay, you do suck.
Right.
But we are getting there. Like we're working on this together.
Plus the group, the chemistry, musical chemistry and personal chemistry of a group of people together, everyone can buoy each other up, and
totally.
buoy each other up, and everyone's weaknesses can kind of mix together to make a sum of a unique strength, I think.
Yeah, we were really lucky
absolutely.
to have found each other at that moment, for
Definitely.
sure.
Yeah.
I felt that. I felt really lucky.
Me too. I almost felt like it was like a gift from the universe. It was like, it felt like more powerful than luck to me. It was like,
yeah,
wow.
Totally. I agree. I still feel that way.
Meant to be.
Yeah, it felt like destiny. Preordained.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
No, I fully understand that. So you also have a great story about how you got your name, Blake Babies. Do you want to tell us that story?
Freda should tell that because that happened before I was in the picture.
Okay.
When the band was still in its conceptual stages, right, Freda?
It's true. It's like purely conceptual, but we were so eager. We thought we needed a band name. So John and I agreed that we were going to ask Allen Ginsberg what we should name our band. We went to see him do a poetry reading at Harvard University, and we asked him pretty abruptly afterwards. We were lined up, like, Mr. Ginsberg, what should we name our band? And he just said Blake Babies instantly.
Wow.
It's pretty good.
That is amazing. There's a lot of destiny and fate involved in this band. I like it. It's a good story.
No, it feels like an honor to have received our name from him,
Yeah.
even like especially now after all these years.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys got together in this mystical way, and then you started, I assume, practicing and playing out on campus. And then where did it go from there? How did you guys get to the point where you were like a real band?
I don't know. It was just like a lot of practicing, starting to try to get gigs where we could. I think our first show was in the basement of a thrift store, right, Freda?
Yeah, it was a place called She's Leaving Home. I just remember all the like racks of clothes around us and people sort of standing in between the clothes in the store. Yeah.
It was a lot. It felt like it. I know the band wasn't together for a long time, but when we were starting out, for me, it felt like it took so long to make anything happen. It just was like, seemed like it was a struggle. It was really exciting, but it was hard to get it off the ground in terms of like having, getting a record out and getting a following. It was just like was a hard slog, a bit of a slog, but we just did everything we could think of, like trying to get gigs and then recording really cheaply on the like overnight shifts at studios where our friend TW got us into this recording studio at Boston Film and Video Foundation. They had some recording stuff, and that was our first recordings were done in there, I think. I don't know. I'm not
like
really...
in the middle of the night, though, because it was cheaper to record, or we could kind of like sneak in. It definitely felt like we were always pushing really hard and always trying really hard, and it was a huge effort, and just to kind of get to whatever we saw as the next stage. And the process, it never felt like anything was handed to us. It felt like we were just always trying to figure out how to make things happen on our own.
Yeah, and like making cassettes and sending the demos out to clubs and to independent record labels, and just like not getting a whole lot of positive feedback, but still totally believing in it and just like always pushing forward to try to keep doing it.
And then you did end up putting out a record just a year after you formed, but that was on like a pretty small indie, right?
It was our own. We sent the demo cassettes around to indie labels and things, but there were no takers, so we weren't going to let that stop us. So we just got a loan, I think from my parents probably, to make.
Yeah, we scraped it together, like your parents and John's parents, and I used some of my student loan money. Like we just literally just scraped together barely enough to press 1,000 copies.
Wow.
Yeah, 1,000 copies of this album that we called Nicely Nicely, and then we started packing them up into record mailers and mailing them all over the place, you know, to fanzines. And I think Freda, were you doing something, working at, like interning at Forced Exposure or something, and we got the mailing list from there or something?
We did, and also Tang, like the record label that the Lemonheads were on, Curtis, the owner of Tang, gave us some contacts to. We really relied on our friends to help us out at that point.
Oh, that's awesome.
And Freda and I would bring a handful of records to the post office every day or something, or a couple of days, and we'd just mail them out, and we'd hope for someone to respond. And I think we got a couple of album reviews and fanzines from that, like in Gerard Cosley's thing, Conflict?
Oh, yeah, we did. We got some press from him.
Yeah, like we got a few reviews and fanzines, and it was really exciting. And you know, some college radio stations around town started playing. I remember the first time we heard a song of ours on the radio on, I think it was WERS. It was so exciting.
So exciting.
The only thing I've ever wanted is to lose myself. So I take a little poison because I need a little help. I don't really care about tomorrow. I'm on a wave coming down from a beautiful face. I've been waiting patiently. Will you ever show your face to me, or am I a fool? Stephen tells me that if we get down and talk to the ceiling, that I could change my reputation and get off on believing. He can sell me on living a lie, flying away from the truth, driven out of the room. I've been waiting patiently. Will you ever show your face to me, or am I a fool?
That was Waiting for Heaven by Blake Babies. If you're enjoying this program, please subscribe to our show on iTunes. To find out what's coming up next, follow us on Twitter at KRSFOW. We're talking with Juliana Hatfield and Freda Love. So how long before you guys went on your first real tour?
Well, the first real tour, it wasn't a real tour. Again, it was something that was so scraped together. It was kind of pathetic in a way. It was beautiful and it was pathetic, but we scraped. I mean, there were shows. There was a show where there were literally 2 people in the crowd and there were 4 people in the band.
Oh, yeah.
It was that kind of a thing.
I know those shows.
Yeah.
Everybody knows those shows. Those are real deal shows.
But I don't remember remember the timeline. Like, Frida, do you remember when we first hit the road? I can't remember.
I probably remember a little bit better because I've been writing about this a bit lately. So I think it was maybe in '88 before. I think we went on the tour in part to go meet Mammoth Records, who would become our record label, and we played for them. And I think we might have signed our contract on that tour. So that was just on Nicely Nicely that we were touring, but we're in the process of trying to take things to the next level. So I think it was '88 because I think the election was going on.
Right. And and so Mammoth Records was this new label in North Carolina, and I guess someone at the University of North Carolina who also worked at Mammoth got a copy of the record that we had sent.
That's
and
right.
That's how they became interested in us.
And then eventually you signed with them, and then you did put out a second record. And what was the difference then once you were signed to a label? How did you find things different?
Well, our lifestyle was pretty much the same. I mean, there was no big influx of cash or anything or in terms of how we lived our lives, but we definitely had more of a recording budget. I guess. I mean, I wasn't really aware of that. We were kind of sort of like a little bit ignorant about money probably, but we had a producer and a better studio, and so the difference in sound between the first record and then the first Mammoth record is pretty different, glaring difference.
Right. And that's classic. I always think of the first record that we have from The Gossip on Kill Rock Stars that was literally recorded in a bathroom.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you can tell the difference between that and the second record for sure.
But when I go back and listen to Nicely Nicely, the first thing that we did ourselves, there's such a nice scrappy charm to it. I really like how it sounds.
I do too now. Yeah, definitely. Like, I remember wanting to distance myself from it, thinking it was so rough. And now, like, my ears like that, like, crunchy sound.
Me too.
Maybe in some ways, sort of sonically, it's more pleasing than the more polished stuff, which sounds a little more dated in some ways.
Isn't that interesting? Technology can really date stuff too. Exactly the way that things were recorded. There was that, that 80s gated snare sound that you can always tell exactly.
That's the signature right there. Yeah.
Well, I think we were really lucky though. I think we escaped any of that. I think when I listen to Earwig and Sunburn, I don't think they sound dated. I think they sound really kind of timeless. And I mean, sonically, I think we avoided.
We did work with really smart people. We were lucky there. The engineers we
people
worked
with really good taste.
Yeah.
So then, did you guys still stay? Did you stay in school throughout this whole process, or did you guys drop out, or what did you do?
I did. I stayed in for 4 years and I graduated.
Woohoo!
I don't talk about that a lot, but yeah, I did. I don't know if did John graduate? I can't remember.
John was just short of graduating. He hung in there for a while, and I was just in and out of school myself. I graduated from college when I was 35 and had 2 babies, so that happened a little bit later. But yeah, that just wasn't my focus at the time.
Yeah. My husband graduated from college when he was 45.
So that can work.
Yeah,
that can definitely work.
Can work for you.
I went back to school when I was 41. I was really glad I had my degree from Berklee because it was applying to graduate programs, and I was able to get into School of the Museum of Fine Arts for this postgraduate year thing that was really great.
Cool.
Art school for a year when I was 41, and that was really excellent.
Amazing. So the band broke up in '93.
I think we broke up before that.
I think it might have been 91, maybe. It seemed like 91 we were still on tour, but kind of in the process of breaking up. And I don't think we played any after 91. John would know. John's better at this kind of thing, but
I know my first solo album, Hey Babe, came out. Well, the date on the album, I think it says 91. I think.
Yeah, so
that came out in 91 or 92.
Okay.
So we were broken up by then.
Okay. So yeah, Juliana, you went on to have a solo career.
Yeah.
And Freda, you and John were in Antenna together.
That's right. And Antenna kind of morphed into The Mysteries of Life, which was my band with my husband, Jake, who was the bass player in Antenna. So there's sort of a continuum there, kind of one band
Yeah.
unfolding into another.
It's amazing how that can, last a lifetime. These chance friendships these meetings that you make at somebody's college room door.
I know, I'm still kind of in it, really.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Very cool. And now you guys are on tour again. You guys are doing some Blake Babies shows.
Yeah. It's wild.
How did that come about?
I don't know. I don't know. Someone unearthed these demos from the Sunburn album that were recorded.
From Earwig, demos from Earwig.
Oh, sorry.
That's right.
Earwig demo, the first album demos. The second album, which is the first Mammoth album. And it's confusing, but because some people say that Earwig is our first album, but Nicely Nicely was the first album. So somehow, did John find these demos?
He did.
know.
John found them. They'd been in storage, and they ended up in his hands.
Okay, so John found these old demos and thought they sounded really good, and so then there was this seed of an idea, like we could release these, and there was some interest in that, and then that led to doing a few shows.
Yeah, and the shows were fun, and so we just decided to do a few more. It's like we're taking it very incrementally. Like I have no idea. We have some shows booked right now, but I have no idea if we'll do more after that. But they have been really fun so far.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you think you guys might make a new record, or are you doing any new songs, or are you just playing old stuff?
Well, John and Freda have been writing stuff, and I think we're going to try to get some new songs together. I'm going to try to, work with some of the stuff they have and come up with some of my own stuff, and then see if we can make some songs come out of it as a band.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's pretty
It is.
exciting.
It's all kind of a fun surprise. Like I don't think any of us expected that we'd be talking about playing shows or writing new songs together.
No way.
But I like the surprise of it, the unexpectedness of like the Blake Babies considering putting new material together in 2016. It's not what I expected. I like that though.
Well, your whole journey has been pretty mystical, it sounds like, from the very beginning.
Yeah. I mean,
I like that.
it was not all good times. I mean, it was a short, when we were originally together, it was kind of tough at times, and there was a lot of, I don't know, it was tough. It was, but
True.
there were a bunch of personnel changes around the three of us, but we ended up with a really good body of work I'm really proud of. And I ended up knowing John and Freda, and I'm really glad to still know them.
Yeah. That's amazing. I do not speak to my guitar player anymore, so
Yeah,
you guys are lucky.
We are.
Yeah.
That happens. But I'm, super close with my bass player, and that's been, 16 years of friendship or something. So it's always good when you can hang on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just like that I've been able to get into a different place, and that we were able to go through definitely like some hard years and like years when we weren't in contact, but that we can work together, and it feels really friendly and surprisingly easy to just be together and make music together. I like that we can fall back on that original chemistry.
Awesome. Well, Freda Love and Juliana Hatfield, thank you so much for being with me today on The Future of What. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Nice talking to you.
And that's our show. The music we played today was used by permission. You heard Blake Babies, and of course our theme song, Mind Your Own Business by the Delta 5. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. For more info on our shows, check out our website at killrockstars.com/thefutureofwhat. Our program was engineered by Brent Asbury at Beta Petrol and is produced by Will Watts and Anna McLean. I'm Portia Sabin, president of Kill Rock Stars. See you next week.